No one expects a single act of kindness to end with handcuffs, a ruined career, and a shattered family. When a devoted single father helped his intoxicated billionaire boss safely home, he thought he was doing the right thing. Instead, her morning panic triggered a legal nightmare that almost destroyed him. Durand Parker was not a man who took risks. At 32, his life was meticulously structured around two unyielding pillars: his 5-year-old daughter, Maya, and his exhausting job as a senior financial analyst at Mitchell Global Investments in Manhattan. Ever since his wife Sarah passed away from a sudden aneurysm 3 years ago, Durand had operated on sheer willpower and caffeine. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, far away from the glittering skyscrapers where he spent 80 hours a week analyzing corporate mergers. His entire existence was dedicated to clearing the mountain of medical debt. His wife's illness had accrued and ensuring Maya had a stable, loving future. At the absolute pinnacle of Durand's corporate world sat Valerie Mitchell. Valerie was a 46-year-old self-made billionaire, the CEO and founder of Mitchell Global. In the financial district, she was a terrifying legend. She was notoriously demanding, possessing a mind like a steel trap and a demeanor that could freeze a boardroom with a single glance. Wall Street magazines frequently featured her on their covers, labeling her the Ice Queen of Acquisitions. She had recently finalized a brutally public and highly contentious divorce from a tech mogul named Robert Chandler, a man who had tried and spectacularly failed to seize half of her empire. Durand had only interacted with Valerie twice in his 4 years at the firm, both times strictly in the capacity of handing her thick, meticulously bound financial dossiers. To him, she was less a human being and more a force of nature, a corporate deity who dictated the rise and fall of thousands of careers. The annual Mitchell Global Winter Charity Gala, held at the opulent Pierre Hotel, was mandatory for anyone above a junior associate level. It was ostensibly a night to raise money for pediatric research, but in reality it was a high-stakes arena for networking, corporate espionage, and brutal office politics. Durand hated these events. He had rented a tuxedo that pulled slightly at the shoulders, kissed a sleeping Maya goodbye under the watchful eye of his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, and taken the subway into Manhattan. The ballroom was a sea of bespoke suits, diamond necklaces, and forced laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the ice sculptures and the endless trays of champagne. Durand stood near a towering floral arrangement, nursing a club soda and mentally running through the calculations for a pending merger in the healthcare sector. "You look like you're plotting a hostile takeover of the hors d'oeuvres table, Durand," a voice chuckled. Durand turned to see his colleague. His, Simon Lewis, balancing 2 glasses of expensive scotch. "Just trying to survive the night, Simon," Durand replied, offering a weary smile. "If I don't secure that promotion to director next quarter, Maya's private school tuition is going to drown me." "You'll get it," Simon assured him, taking a sip. "You practically built the financial models for the Rothschild acquisition single-handedly. Even the Ice Queen knows your worth." Simon gestured subtly toward the center of the room with his glass. Durand followed his gaze. Valerie Mitchell held court near the grand piano. She wore an emerald green Tom Ford gown that cost more than Durand's annual rent. She looked stunning, powerful, and utterly unapproachable. However, as Durand watched, he noticed something unusual. The customary sharpness in her posture was gone. Her movements were slightly uncoordinated, and she was on her 4th glass of whiskey in less than an hour. "She's going hard tonight," Simon muttered, leaning in. Rumor has it Robert Chandler just won a massive settlement in their offshore holdings dispute this afternoon. The legal team has been panicking all day. As the hours dragged on, the gala began to thin out. The polite networking devolved into drunken boasting. Durand checked his watch. It was nearing 1:00 a.m. He was about to slip out the side doors and catch an Uber back to Queens when a commotion near the VIP coat check caught his attention. Valerie Mitchell was leaning heavily against a marble pillar, her head bowed. The emerald dress looked disheveled, and she dropped her clutch, scattering lipstick and business cards across the polished floor. Beside her stood Arthur Pendleton, the executive vice president of risk management. Arthur was a known predator within the firm, a man who wore too much cologne and had a long history of making junior female analysts profoundly uncomfortable. Durand froze. He watched as Arthur placed a heavy, overly familiar hand on Valerie's bare shoulder. He was speaking softly into her ear, steering her away from the main exit and toward the secluded service elevators. Valerie tried to swat his hand away, but her coordination was entirely gone. She stumbled, and Arthur caught her by the waist, his grip tightening aggressively. "Come on, Valerie," Durand heard Arthur say smoothly as he walked closer. "Your driver went home. I'll take you back to my place in Tribeca. We can discuss the board meeting." Valerie muttered something incoherent, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She was completely defenseless. Every instinct in Durand's body screamed at him to walk away. Getting involved in the personal affairs of a billionaire CEO, especially when she was severely intoxicated, was corporate suicide. If Arthur Pendleton felt slighted, he could have Durand fired before breakfast. But as Durand looked at Valerie, stripped of her armor and clearly in danger, he didn't see the terrifying CEO. He saw a vulnerable woman about to be taken advantage of by a man who had no boundaries. Durand thought of Maya, of the kind of world he wanted his daughter to grow up in. He couldn't just walk out the door. "Excuse me, Arthur," Durand said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the hallway. Arthur turned, his eyes narrowing in irritation. He looked Durand up and down, clearly trying to place his face. "This is a private conversation. Have a good night, son." Durand stepped closer, forcing himself to maintain eye contact with the towering vice president. "Actually, Miss Mitchell's executive assistant texted me." Durand lied smoothly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Her private car had a flat, but a replacement black car is waiting at the south entrance. I was instructed to escort her down." Arthur's face flushed with anger. "I'm a vice president. I can handle the CEO, whoever you are." "I'm Durand Parker, senior analyst," Durand said, keeping his tone perfectly flat, though his hands were trembling slightly. "And if you prefer, Arthur, I can call the hotel security to assist us both in getting Miss Mitchell to her designated vehicle. I'm sure the paparazzi out front would love a photo." The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Arthur's jaw tightened. He knew that making a scene with the intoxicated CEO would jeopardize his own lucrative position. With a sneer of pure venom, Arthur released Valerie's waist. "You're making a mistake, Parker," Arthur hissed, stepping back. "A big one." He turned on his heel and disappeared back into the remnants of the gala. Valerie swayed dangerously as Arthur let go. Durand quickly stepped forward, offering his arm just in time to stop her from collapsing onto the marble floor. "Miss Mitchell? Valerie?" Durand asked softly. She looked up at him, her mascara slightly smudged, her normally piercing blue eyes clouded with alcohol and exhaustion. Where's Robert?" she slurred, confusing the present with her painful past. "You're safe," Durand said gently. "I'm going to get you home." Durand gathered her spilled belongings, stuffing them back into her clutch, and carefully guided her out the side entrance to avoid the remaining photographers. He flagged down a yellow taxi, not wanting to wait for a rideshare app. "Where to?" the cab driver asked. Durand looked at Valerie, who was now slumped against the window, her eyes closed. "Miss Mitchell, I need your address," he said gently. 432 Park Avenue, she mumbled, barely conscious. "Penthouse." The ride to Billionaire's Row was painfully silent. Durand sat stiffly on his side of the cab, staring out at the blurred neon lights of the city. He checked his phone. It was 1:45 a.m. Mrs. Gable would be furious. He sent her a quick text apologizing and promising an extra $50 for keeping Maya late. When they pulled up to the towering luxury skyscraper on Park Avenue, the cab driver turned around. $54, pal." Durand sighed, pulling out his personal credit card. He couldn't exactly ask the unconscious billionaire for cash. Getting Valerie out of the cab and into the building was a monumental task. She could barely stand. As they entered the opulent, gold-leafed lobby, Durand looked around for the concierge or a doorman to take over. To his dismay, the front desk was momentarily deserted. A sign read, Security patrol on rounds. Back in 5 minutes. Durand couldn't just leave her passed out on a lobby sofa. He checked her clutch and found a heavy black key card. He guided her to the private elevator banks and swiped the card. The doors chimed and opened, and the elevator began its rapid ascent directly to the penthouse floor. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling, breathtaking apartment. It was a masterpiece of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, minimalist white furniture, and walls adorned with genuine modern art. But despite the luxury, it felt incredibly cold. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a museum. Valerie suddenly groaned, clutching her stomach. "Bathroom," she gasped. Durand quickly guided her down a long hallway, pushing open the first door that looked like a master suite. He helped her into the massive, marble-clad, ensuite bathroom just in time. As she fell to her knees in front of the toilet, Durand respectfully stepped back out into the bedroom, giving her privacy. He stood awkwardly near the door, surrounded by silk drapes and custom-built mahogany closets. He felt completely out of place, like a trespasser in an alien world. 10 minutes later, the bathroom door creaked open. Valerie stumbled out, looking pale and thoroughly exhausted. She collapsed face first onto the massive king-sized bed, groaning softly. Durand hesitated. He couldn't leave her in her formal gown and heels. It was restrictive, and she could choke if she got sick again. He approached the bed slowly. "Miss Mitchell, I'm going to take your shoes off, okay?" She didn't respond. Durand carefully unbuckled her diamond-encrusted heels and set them neatly on the floor. He pulled a thick, plush duvet from the foot of the bed and draped it over her shoulders, making sure she was turned safely on her side. He walked over to the nightstand, found a crystal carafe of water, and poured a glass, setting it next to a bottle of Advil he found in the bathroom cabinet. Before leaving, he pulled a small notepad from the desk and wrote a quick note. "Miss Mitchell, you were unwell at the gala. I made sure you got home safely. Please drink water. Durand Parker. Financial analysis." He placed the note right next to the water glass where she couldn't miss it. Durand let out a long breath, the adrenaline finally leaving his system. He had done the right thing. He had saved his boss from a predatory executive and made sure she was safe in her own home. He walked back to the private elevator, swiped the keycard to go down, and left the building. As he walked out into the frigid New York night air, the night doorman was just returning to the desk. The doorman barely glanced at Durand as he exited. Durand caught the subway back to Queens, his mind entirely focused on getting back to Maya. He fell into his own lumpy mattress at 3:30 a.m., completely unaware that his simple act of decency had just set a ticking time bomb under his life. When the sun rose over Manhattan the next morning, Durand's world was about to be violently torn apart. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, striking Valerie Mitchell directly in the eyes. She groaned, pulling a silk pillow over her head. Her skull pounded with a relentless, thudding rhythm, and her mouth tasted like ash. Slowly, the fragments of the previous night began to piece themselves together. The Pierre Hotel, the endless flowing whiskey, the overwhelming panic following the news of her ex-husband's legal victory. She sat up, clutching the plush duvet around her, and looked around her bedroom. She was still in her emerald Tom Ford gown, though the restrictive diamond heels were neatly placed on the floor. How had she gotten home? She rubbed her temples, trying to clear the fog. She remembered feeling dizzy near the coat check. She remembered Arthur Pendleton's suffocating grip and the overpowering stench of his Tom Ford cologne. Panic flared in her chest, but as she scanned the pristine, empty room, she realized she was alone. Then, she saw the glass of water, the Advil, and the note on the nightstand. Valerie reached out with a trembling hand and read the neat block lettering. Durand Parker, Financial Analysis. The name rang a faint bell, the brilliant analyst who had drafted the Rothschild models. He had brought her home. He had taken off her shoes, left her medication, and quietly let himself out. A wave of profound relief washed over her, followed instantly by a cold prickle of dread as she reached for her throat. Her neck was bare. The Vanderbilt sapphire, a breathtaking, flawless 12-carat blue diamond necklace flanked by 50 smaller diamonds, an heirloom piece worth upwards of $4 million, was gone. Valerie bolted out of bed, ignoring the blinding pain in her head. She tore through the bed sheets, scoured the marble floor of the bathroom, and frantically emptied the contents of her clutch onto the bed. Lipstick, a compact, business cards, her penthouse keycard. No necklace. Her mind raced. The necklace had a complicated double-locking clasp. It couldn't simply fall off. It had to be unfastened. Durand Parker. The relief she had felt moments ago curdled into icy, furious betrayal. A mid-level analyst drowning in medical debt, according to HR files. She vaguely recalled reviewing during bonus season. He had seen an intoxicated billionaire, escorted her to her private sanctuary, played the gentleman, and walked out with a fortune in his pocket. Valerie grabbed her phone and dialed the head of Mitchell Global's private security, Jackson Cole. "Jackson," Valerie snapped, her voice trembling with cold rage. "I have a theft to report. A severe one. And I know exactly who did it." 3 hours later, Durand was sitting at his cubicle on the 42nd floor of the Mitchell Global building. He was running purely on lukewarm coffee and sheer anxiety. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the bizarre events of the night before. But as the morning dragged on with no word from the executive floor, he began to relax. Valerie probably didn't even remember how she got home. He could go back to being invisible. He was just finalizing a spreadsheet. Glancing at the clock too. 15 p.m. He had to leave by 4:00 p.m. to pick up Maya from her after-school program. Durand Parker? Durand looked up. 2 large men in heavy trench coats were standing over his desk. Behind them stood Jackson Cole, glaring daggers. The bustling trading floor around them suddenly went dead silent. Keyboards stopped clacking. Dozens of eyes turned toward Durand's cubicle. "Yes?" Durand asked, his stomach plummeting. "Detectives Miller and Vance, NYPD," the lead detective said, flashing a gold shield. "Stand up, sir. Keep your hands where we can see them." "What? Why? Is this a joke?" Durand stammered, standing up slowly. "You're under arrest for grand larceny in the 1st degree," Detective Miller stated loudly, his voice echoing across the silent floor. He grabbed Durand's arm, spinning him around forcefully, and slammed him against the cubicle partition. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Durand's wrists. "Wait, larceny? I haven't stolen anything," Durand yelled, panic rising in his throat. Over the partition, Durand locked eyes with Arthur Pendleton, who was standing outside his glass-walled office, arms crossed, a sickening smirk playing on his lips. "You have the right to remain silent," the detective droned, patting Durand down and confiscating his phone and wallet. "Please, you have to listen to me," Durand begged, struggling against the tight cuffs. "I have a 5-year-old daughter. I have to pick her up from school in 2 hours. If I'm not there, she has no one." "Tell it to the judge, buddy," Miller sneered, shoving Durand forward. The walk to the elevators was the longest of Durand's life. He was paraded through the center of the trading floor like a trophy kill. He saw Simon Lewis staring at him in open-mouthed horror. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the stares of his colleagues, Durand felt a tear, hot and stinging, track down his cheek. He wasn't crying for his ruined career or his shattered reputation. He was crying for Maya, waiting on the curb with her little pink backpack, looking for a father who wasn't going to show up. The 17th Precinct holding cell smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and despair. Durand had been sitting on a steel bench for 6 hours. The detectives had interrogated him mercilessly, accusing him of exploiting his CEO's intoxication to steal the Vanderbilt sapphire. They had a warrant and were already tossing his apartment in Queens. "I left the note so she wouldn't be scared," Durand had repeated endlessly, his voice hoarse. "I didn't take anything. I just wanted to get her away from Arthur." The police didn't care. To them, the motive was obvious. A desperate, widowed father buried in debt hits the ultimate jackpot. Finally, a public defender named Richard Lawson, a frazzled man clutching a battered briefcase, was allowed to see him. "It's bad, Durand," Lawson said, rubbing his eyes. "They're pushing for maximum bail. They're painting you as a predator who targeted an impaired woman. And I need you to brace yourself for this." Durand's head snapped up. "Maya. Where is Maya?" Lawson winced. "The school couldn't reach you. Your emergency contact Mrs. Gable, is out of state visiting her sister. Following protocol, the school contacted Child Protective Services. Maya is currently in a temporary foster intake facility. The air rushed out of Duran's lungs. The walls of the cell seemed to shrink, crushing him. "No," he whispered, a guttural sound of pure agony ripping from his throat. "No, she's terrified of strangers. You have to get her out. Tell them I'm innocent. I'll try to arrange an emergency custody hearing, but until you make bail, you can't take her," Lawson said gently. "Bail is going to be set at $500,000. Do you have $50,000 in cash for a bondsman?" Duran buried his face in his handcuffed hands, sobbing openly. He had $92 in his checking account. His life was over, and his daughter was locked in the system. 2 miles away, in the soaring glass tower of Mitchell Global, Valerie Mitchell sat at her custom mahogany desk. She should have felt vindicated. The thief was caught. The police had assured her the necklace would turn up during the search of his apartment. But a strange, persistent unease gnawed at her. She opened the file HR had sent up on Durand Parker. Outstanding performance reviews. A spotless record. A widower raising a young daughter alone. He volunteered on weekends. Why would a man so meticulous, so devoted to his child's stability, commit a crime so brazenly obvious and then leave a signed note at the scene? There was a knock on the door. Arthur Pendleton strolled in, pouring himself a bourbon from her private bar without asking. "I heard the good news," Arthur said, taking a sip. "Filthy opportunist. I knew there was something off about Parker the moment I saw him at the gala." Valerie looked up sharply. "You saw him at the gala?" Arthur hesitated, a brief flash of something unreadable crossing his face. Briefly, near the end of the night, he had a crazed look in his eye. "Frankly, Valerie, you're lucky the necklace is all he took." Valerie's eyes narrowed. The fragments of her memory shifted again. The heavy hand on her shoulder, the smell of the cologne. "I can handle the CEO, whoever you are." Wait, had Arthur said that? "Get out, Arthur," Valerie said quietly. "Excuse me? I have work to do. Leave." The moment the door clicked shut, Valerie hit the intercom button. "Jackson, come to my office immediately, and bring your laptop." 5 minutes later, the head of security was standing by her desk. "The Pierre Hotel," Valerie commanded. "I want the security footage from the coat check and the south corridor between 12:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. last night." "Valerie, the police are already handling this." "I don't care about the police right now, Jackson. Get me that footage." "You're the head of security for a global firm. You have the connections. Hack it, buy it, or threaten them for it. Just get it." It took 20 minutes. Jackson synced his laptop to the massive flat screen on Valerie's wall. "Play it," she said, her arms crossed tight against her chest. The grainy black and white video sprang to life. It showed the coat check area. Valerie watched herself stumble into the frame, clearly intoxicated, dropping her purse. Then Arthur Pendleton appeared. Valerie felt physically sick as she watched Arthur corner her, leaning in entirely too close, his hand gripping her bare shoulder with possessive force. She saw herself try to pull away, saw herself stumble. And then Arthur lunged forward to catch her. "Pause it," Valerie commanded, stepping closer to the screen. "Zoom in on his left hand. Play it frame by frame." Jackson tapped the keyboard. The footage moved in stuttering, slow-motion increments. As Arthur caught her waist with his right arm, his left hand shot up to the back of her neck. His fingers worked with practiced, terrifying speed at the clasp of the Vanderbilt sapphire. In 2 frames, the necklace was free. In the next frame, it slid smoothly into the interior pocket of his tuxedo jacket. Valerie stopped breathing. A moment later, Durand Parker entered the frame. He confronted Arthur. He didn't look crazed. He looked terrified, but utterly resolute. He shielded her body with his own, intimidated the much larger vice president into backing down, and gently guided her away to safety. "My God," Valerie whispered, the blood draining from her face. She had arrested the wrong man. She had humiliated, chained, and destroyed the only decent person in that room, a man who had risked his own career to protect her from a predator. "Jackson," Valerie said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. "Call the district attorney, right now, and tell my private pilot to prep the helicopter. We're going to the 17th precinct. What about Pendleton? Jackson asked, his own face dark with fury. Don't let him leave the building, the Ice Queen commanded, her eyes burning with a terrifying fire. Lock down his office, seize his hard drives, and call the SEC. If he's desperate enough to steal a necklace, God knows what he's been doing to my company's books. I want him ruined before dinner. The 17th precinct of the NYPD was a chaotic, grimy institution that rarely saw anything above a mid-level felony or a drunken bar brawl. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the palpable desperation of the city's underbelly. When Valerie Mitchell's black SUV motorcade screeched to a halt out front, the sleek vehicles cutting sharply through the typical line of battered patrol cars, the atmosphere inside the station abruptly shifted. Flanked by her imposing private security detail and 3 of her most ruthless corporate litigators, Valerie burst through the double glass doors. She was no longer the disheveled, vulnerable woman from the gala. She had reassembled her armor, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit, her posture rigid and her expression carved from absolute ice. She commanded the room without uttering a single syllable. The usual clamor of ringing phones and shouting officers ground to a sudden, stunned halt. Captain Reynolds, the precinct commander, rushed out of his glass-walled office, hastily buttoning his collar and wiping sweat from his brow. Miss Mitchell, what an unexpected— Where is Durand Parker? Valerie demanded, her voice cutting through the stifling room like a scythe. She didn't break her stride, forcing the burly captain to backpedal awkwardly to avoid colliding with her. I want him out of this building in exactly 3 minutes. If he is not walking out those doors, my legal team will file suit against this department, the City of New York, and every individual officer involved in his arrest. We will sue for wrongful imprisonment, defamation of character, emotional distress, and gross negligence. Ma'am, with all due respect, Mr. Parker is currently being processed for grand larceny, Detective Miller interjected, stepping forward with his chest puffed out, attempting to reclaim the authority of his precinct. You filed the complaint yourself. We found a signed note at the scene. It's an open and shut case. Valerie stopped dead in her tracks, turning a piercing, terrifying gaze onto the detective. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I am unfiling it, detective. Because while you were busy parading an innocent, hardworking father through his office in handcuffs, my private security team actually did your job for you. She snapped her fingers sharply. Without missing a beat, Jackson Cole stepped forward and shoved a high-resolution tablet into Captain Reynolds' chest. The high-definition, frame-by-frame security video from the Pierre Hotel played on a continuous loop. It clearly showed Arthur Pendleton's practiced hands unclasping the Vanderbilt sapphire and sliding it into his tuxedo jacket, followed seconds later by Durand bravely stepping in to intervene. Captain Reynolds blanched, the color draining entirely from his face as he watched the irrefutable evidence of a false arrest. "Oh, God," he muttered. "Exactly," Valerie said, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "Arthur Pendleton is currently detained in his office by my security personnel. He has already fully confessed to my legal team in a pathetic attempt to avoid the federal embezzlement charges we uncovered on his hard drives an hour ago. The necklace is sitting in a wall safe in his Tribeca loft. The district attorney has already been notified and is drawing up the warrants. Now, I will ask you one last time before I burn this precinct to the ground. Where is Durand Parker?" 2 minutes later, a nervous desk sergeant led Valerie down a narrow, flickering cinder-block hallway. The heavy steel door of the interrogation room clicked and whined as it swung open. Inside, the air was suffocatingly close. Durand sat hunched over a scarred metal table beneath a harsh fluorescent light. His wrists were still bound by heavy steel cuffs, his face buried deep in his arms. His shoulders shook slightly. He looked entirely broken, a man whose entire world had just been systematically dismantled. "Mr. Parker," a soft, steady voice said from the doorway. Durand flinched, slowly lifting his head. His eyes were bloodshot, bruised with exhaustion, and terrifyingly hollow. Standing in the doorway, looking deeply remorseful and entirely stripped of her boardroom venom, was Valerie Mitchell. "What do you want?" Durand rasped, his voice trembling with a mixture of raw grief and simmering fury. "Haven't you done enough?" "They took my daughter because I stepped in. Because I tried to help you when you couldn't stand up. My little girl is sitting in a state facility with strangers." Valerie felt a physical, breathless blow to her chest. She had ruthless corporate rivals, and she had dismantled companies without a second thought, but she had never destroyed an innocent life. Seeing the agonizing devastation on Durand's face, she felt a profound, sickening wave of guilt. "Durand, the cuffs are coming off right now. The charges are dropped entirely," Valerie said, stepping fully into the small room. "We found the footage of Arthur taking the necklace, and we saw the footage of you saving me. I was wrong. I am so incredibly sorry." A uniformed officer quickly stepped past her, inserting a small key and unlocking the handcuffs. The metal clattered loudly against the table. Durand rubbed his raw red wrists, but there was no spark of relief in his eyes. Instead, there was only sheer blinding panic. "It doesn't matter," he choked out, standing up on shaking legs, bracing himself against the table. "It's Friday evening. The family courts are closed for the weekend. The ACS Intake Center told my public defender they won't even look at processing a release for Maya until Monday morning at the earliest. She's going to spend the whole weekend lost in a system with people she doesn't know. She's terrified of the dark, Valerie. She needs her dad tonight, not Monday." Valerie's jaw clenched tightly. The bureaucratic red tape of the Administration for Children's Services was notoriously rigid and unforgiving, designed to move at a glacial pace. But Valerie Mitchell had never met a system she couldn't break with enough leverage and capital. The guilt she felt morphed instantly into fierce, unstoppable resolve. "She is not spending the weekend there," Valerie stated with absolute, unwavering authority. She pulled out her sleek smartphone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Jackson, get the helicopter prepped for a rooftop pickup at the ACS facility in Brooklyn. Have aviation clear the airspace." She paused, pulling up a highly restricted contact. "And patch me through to the mayor's personal cell. I don't care if he's at dinner, interrupt him." Durand watched in stunned silence, his breath catching in his throat as the billionaire CEO turned the dingy precinct interrogation room into her personal war room. She didn't just ask for bureaucratic favors. She commanded the city's elite with terrifying efficiency. Within 20 tense minutes, a frantic family court judge had been roused from his Upper East Side dinner party to sign a highly irregular emergency release order. Valerie slipped her phone back into her pocket and turned back to Durand, her icy demeanor softening entirely as she met his tear-filled eyes. "Come with me, Durand," she said gently. "We're going to get your daughter." The ACS facility in Brooklyn was stark and institutional. When Durand burst through the intake doors, closely followed by Valerie and a swarm of highly paid lawyers, the front desk workers were already scrambling. A social worker led them down a linoleum-tiled hallway to a small, brightly colored playroom. Sitting in the corner, clutching her pink backpack to her chest, was 5-year-old Maya. Her cheeks were tear-stained, and she looked utterly exhausted. "Maya!" Durand cried, falling to his knees. The little girl looked up, her eyes widening. "Daddy!" She dropped the backpack and ran across the room, launching herself into Durand's arms. He buried his face in her curls, sobbing freely, holding her so tightly it seemed he might never let go. Valerie stood in the doorway, watching the reunion. For the first time in years, the Ice Queen felt a tear slide down her cheek. She quietly stepped back into the hallway, giving them privacy, and made a silent vow. The next few days were a blur of chaotic readjustment, but Valerie's invisible, powerful hand guided every step. First, Durand was explicitly told not to return to his queen's apartment. During the police search, the detectives had torn the place apart, destroying furniture and breaking framed photos of Durand's late wife. Instead, a Mitchell Global private car drove Durand and Maya to a sprawling, fully furnished corporate suite in a luxury high-rise overlooking Central Park. "Miss Mitchell insists you stay here while your apartment is completely renovated at the company's expense," the driver informed a bewildered Durand. On Monday morning, a company-wide memo was blasted to all 10,000 Mitchell Global employees. It was ruthless and transparent. Arthur Pendleton had been terminated with extreme prejudice and was currently sitting in Rikers Island facing grand larceny and corporate fraud charges. Durand Parker was publicly commended for his integrity, his bravery, and his unwavering moral compass. But Valerie wasn't done. At noon, she summoned Durand to the penthouse boardroom. He walked in, wearing a sharp new suit, a gift from the company, looking rested but still overwhelmed by the rapid shift in his reality. Valerie stood at the head of the long oak table. "Durand, please, sit." He sat down, his hands folded on the table. "Valerie, the suite, the clothes. It's too much. You didn't have to do all this." "It's a fraction of what I owe you," Valerie said, leaning forward. "You risked everything to protect me from a predator, and my immediate reaction was to assume the worst of you. I almost cost you the most precious thing in your life." She slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. "What is this?" Durand asked. "Arthur Pendleton's departure left a massive vacuum in risk management," Valerie explained. "I need someone in that office who possesses a spine of steel, an analytical genius, and, above all, unimpeachable integrity. I'm promoting you to Executive Vice President of Risk Management." Durand stared at her, his jaw dropping. "Valerie, that's a C-suite position. I don't know if I'm—" "You are more than qualified," she interrupted smoothly. "Your salary is quintupled, effective immediately. Furthermore, Mitchell Global has fully settled all of your outstanding medical debts from your late wife's treatments. And finally, I have personally set up an irrevocable educational trust for Maya. Whether she wants to go to Harvard or art school in Paris, it's covered." Durand looked at the papers, his vision blurring with fresh tears. The crushing weight that had sat on his chest for 3 long years, the suffocating fear of poverty, the exhaustion, the dread of the future, simply vanished. He looked up at Valerie, seeing past the billionaire CEO to the woman who had finally learned to trust again. "Thank you," Durand whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given us our lives back." Valerie offered a rare, genuine, and stunningly warm smile. "No, Durand, you saved mine. Now, go pick up your daughter. You're a vice president now. You make your own hours." Durand walked out of the towering glass skyscraper that afternoon, not as a faceless, exhausted analyst, but as a man who had weathered the ultimate storm. He had stood by his morals in the darkest hour, and the universe had finally tipped the scales in his favor. Wow, talk about a twist of fate. From being handcuffed on the office floor to becoming the vice president of a billionaire's empire, Durand's incredible story proves that doing the right thing, even when it's terrifying, can change your life forever. What would you have done if you saw your boss in danger? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic real-life stories.
Hi, my name is Shalom Royal Hunger, the owner and manager of Shalom Royal Hunger. After watching the video, Black single dad took his drunk boss home. Her next morning action almost ruined his life. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the mix of tension, uncertainty, and the consequences that can come from a single decision. The story explores how quickly situations can become complicated, even when someone is trying to do the right thing. It also highlights the importance of trust, communication, and understanding before jumping to conclusions. One gentle lesson I took from it is that our actions often have ripple effects we can't predict, which makes honesty and clear communication so important. Did you feel sympathy for the single dad's situation, and which moment in the story surprised you the most? Maybe there's a reminder here to approach difficult situations with patience and to seek understanding before making judgments about others. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like or subscribe. Thanks for spending part of your day with us and being part of the community.